Welcome back to the Solid Verbal boys and girls. My name is Ty Hildenbrandt. That guy over there, the one, the only, still the incomparable Dan Rubenstein. Welcome back to the show, my friend. How goes it?
It's really good, Ty. Life is good. Had a good Mother's Day weekend, Ty. Got outside a bunch, ate a bunch of good food, and am thrilled to continue our Will It Ever Happen 4 series this week with Penn State and, Tennessee later in the week?
That is correct. So today it is Ben Jones from statecollege.com. We'll be talking all things Penn State with Dan and I. And then on the Thursday episode that we're doing a little later in the week, Austin Price from VolQuest.
Oh, nice.
Big Tennessee site is going to be stopping on by. Got some great suggestions. We appreciate everybody who wrote in for who we should invite on to talk Tennessee football. It'll be Austin's first appearance on the show, so we're excited to have him with us.
Hey, sorry for the quick interruption, but it'd be incredible if you considered subscribing to the Solid Verbal YouTube channel right down below. Oh, very much excited. What are you excited to talk about with Ben today? Because this is a pretty personal episode, and feel free to sort of throw in whatever housekeeping you need to throw in to this answer. But this is our preamble to the interview. So what are you excited to go through with Ben, who intimately knows the Penn State program?
Yeah. Ben does a great job. I'm excited to have him back on the show. Look, I'm the Penn State alum. Between the two of us, there's a reason if you look over my shoulder, you see the street sign from Beaver Avenue and Locust Lane. That's where I used to live, believe it or not. Way back when.
Stories Ty's house could tell.
Way back when. That was my stomping grounds up at Penn State. So, I love when we get a chance to do these types of interviews and have these types of specific team conversations. We're going to keep doing those with Tennessee and other schools here throughout the month of May. The one thing that dawned on me as I was going through and trying to figure out what I want to ask Ben, what I want to talk to Ben about. I don't know who the leader is of this team. I don't know who the leader is. I know who the names are. I know Drew Allar, Nick Singleton, and Abdul Carter. I know all of these guys, but for a multitude of reasons, I want to know who the heartbeat of this team really is. Who is the guy in the big team huddle that's going to get everybody going? Separate from all the questions that I know we have about the offense and Drew Allar and the new offensive system and new defensive system to an extent with Tom Allen, like all of that stuff being what it is, I want to know who the heartbeat of the team is, who's going to get Penn State revved up this season. The other thing that I want to talk to him about, maybe I'll lead off with this. I've said this to you more times than I could count.
Okay.
James Franklin, Penn State as a whole, are truly the biggest beneficiaries, in my opinion, of this new era of college football, where more teams get in the playoff, even with more teams in the Big Ten. That's not to say that USC and Washington and Oregon, playing teams like that is going to make their schedule easier. Thankfully, they do not have to play Oregon this year, which is nice for them. But it also means that with a new schedule, maybe they don't have to deal with both Ohio State and Michigan year in, year out, the way they've had to. Those have sort of been the blockade of sorts, preventing Penn State from achieving greater heights in the Big Ten. And so I'm just curious to get Ben's take on how the program maybe feels about this new world order in the sport. Does it recognize that this is an opportunity to get into the playoff maybe a little bit more easily? You go 10-2, you keep doing what you've been doing, that puts you in a pretty good spot in the year of our Lord 2024. So I have bigger picture questions about the program, where its place is amidst all of the change around college football, and then specifically, like, who's the dude in the huddle that's just revving people up?
So Penn State in 2025, which I think is a good question. Who is that guy? Penn State does not play Michigan next season. So this season, 2024, they do. But 2025, they do get Oregon from a new look Big Ten. They're at Ohio State, UCLA on the road in Pasadena to finish out the year. So that's definitely different. Actually, no, sorry. The dates haven't been announced. I'm just looking at a list of games. But no, they don't have Michigan in 2025. So that's definitely new for the Penn State fan experience.
They don't play them this year either.
Penn State doesn't play Michigan this year either?
No.
Wow.
No,
that is so new and weird.
They've got Ohio State at home this year, but no Michigan on the schedule.
Oh, yeah, look at that. So no Michigan, no Oregon, no Iowa defense to face. Pretty good year for, I mean, it's weird.
Yeah.
It's a strange year, but it's a decent one for Penn State's schedule.
It's a strange year, but a decent one in that even though there is some obvious blue blood name action on this schedule, all these teams are in transition. USC in transition, new defense, new quarterback. Washington obviously was in the playoff.
A lot. Everything's
national
new,
championship last season. A lot walking out the door. You can go right down the list. Even Wisconsin is still in transition from new leadership, new quarterback situation. Like, there is a lot new on this schedule. Ohio State's really the one that you look at and you circle and say, wow, that they're not going to be favored in that game. But all the other ones feel like they're out there for Penn State if it can get its act together. 2 new coordinators, hopefully bringing Drew Allar along a little bit more to help realize some of that 5-star talent that Penn State fans thought they were getting. There is a lot, I think, around the Penn State program that makes it one of the more interesting teams to follow 2024. No question about it for me.
No protected rival, right, for Penn State in the way that other schools. I think they're the only Big Ten school without the protect. UCLA is USC, Oregon is Washington, Michigan, Ohio State. Interesting. It's quite interesting that Penn State will technically play the most varied schedule in the future Big Ten.
For sure. Okay, so look, if you are just finding us, hit follow, hit subscribe on your podcasting app of choice, out on YouTube. We drop 2 episodes a week throughout the off season as we get a little bit closer to the actual season, start doing previews and whatnot. In the month of July, we'll switch it up to at least 3 episodes a week. Hit our website, solidverbal.com. That's where we've also been posting some of the clips that we're putting out on social media and whatnot. We are starting to rev the engines up a little bit here as we get deeper into the month of May. Let's turn it over to our good friend Ben Jones from statecollege.com, Dan, and talk all things Penn State, shall we?
Definitely.
All right, Dan, joining us now from statecollege.com. We're bringing him back to the show. Ben Jones here to talk any and all things Penn State football. Ben, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you for doing this. Okay. What is holding Penn State back?
Get right into it.
What is holding Penn State back? Why is Penn State not more of a national contender, a Big Ten threat? What is holding this team back? I feel like it's the most interesting thing that we can start with.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, I think to a certain extent, the fact that Penn State gets to the Ohio State and Michigan game every year, and that game means something, sort of states that Penn State is at least a threat in the Big Ten theoretically. Now, what's holding them back? I think that's the $10 million a year question at this point for Penn State, is the sort of idea that they're recruiting really well. They're winning all the games that they ought to. They're getting to the games that you should be in if you're a program like Penn State, but they really are having a hard time winning those games at all and or consistently. And I think that comes down to a lot of different things. And each year, you can sort of explain it away as, they had some injuries at one point, or, Michigan went on to win a national title. These things here or there where you go, they were just a little bit better. I think there's a narrative out there that James Franklin's not good in these big games. I don't know if that's really the case. I mean, Penn State's been competitive in most all of them, has had a chance to win a lot of them. And I think a lot of the times when it comes down to, so why did they lose? I don't know that it was a decision. I think it was more execution or a little bit of luck here or there. So what are they missing? I don't know that anybody really knows, but I think that's the hard part, is it's everything. I think that's what James Franklin says a lot, is to win those games, you have to be good at everything. And the offseason, you have to be good at everything. In season, you have to be good in those games. And, I talked to Julian Fleming. He's been an interesting sort of insight into, so what did Ohio State do well? Whatever you want to say about Julian Fleming's time at Ohio State, he was in that football building for years. And Ohio State's obviously figured out a lot of things. And he's talked a lot about all the little details matter, all the little consistencies matter, all those little things matter. And I think, is that Penn State's problem? I think at the end of the day, when you're playing really good teams, the margin for error is very small, and Penn State, for the most part, has not been on the right side of that margin for error.
I've said this for a while now, Ben, and Dan would back me up here. I think James Franklin is a huge beneficiary of this new world order of college football, because the program at its best over the last decade is kind of a 2-loss team. at its best, a 2-loss team, usually to Ohio State and then somebody else, Michigan, you name it. Now that gets you in the playoff, possibly with a home game at Beaver Stadium if things break correctly. Has anyone around the program come to a similar realization? Because if so, I would think that would be rather energizing for a program that is looking to get over that proverbial hump.
The most exciting bronze medal situation in America.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit of both, because I think that there is, as much as they don't want to admit it out loud, an excitement about the idea that getting to the playoffs is now easier. Now, to a certain extent, that just sort of delays losing to the teams that you're trying to beat until a later date kind of thing. You know, if Penn State's existential issue is can't beat Michigan, can't beat Ohio State, then playing them in the playoffs is only just sort of a variation of congratulations, you made a little bit further this time in that equation. But I think there's no question that, you know, the biggest thing for Penn State as college football changes is it's a program, regardless of its success on a elite level, is always going to be relevant in the conversation relative to big name brands that are going to be able to recruit well, that are going to put fans in the seats, that are going to be able to have success. And I think that really extends the amount of time that Penn State has to figure it out. You know, if you're some of these programs that are trying to stay relevant or trying to get into that conversation whenever college football changes again, you're running out of time for, like, Indiana football is running out of time to take the next step. So when things kick into whatever happens next, that they'll still be there. Penn State's already there. So I think that extends their window in a certain sense. But yeah, there's no question, to your point, that the fact that Penn State knows it can pretty much do what it's been doing and probably make the playoffs is advantageous. On the other hand, there are a lot of two-loss teams at the end of the year out there, you know, trying to make the playoffs now as well. So I think you kind of have to keep your focus. But I do think that the ecosystem changing helps. Then again, in the negative direction, it's not like adding Oregon and Washington and USC, and to a certain extent UCLA is like, well, things also just got easier for you too.
Right.
So I think it's a little bit of a catch-22 there.
When you look at what's been an okay offense, pretty good against lower tier teams, all world against Maryland, but otherwise an offense that, you know, struggles. I think they scored 13.5 points collectively or on average last year against Michigan and Ohio State, and the Ohio State game being at home. What is it about offensive struggles? Is it a continuity thing with coordinators? Is it a misevaluation of quarterbacks? Although I will say Drew Allar, I still think is TBD. Offensive line struggles, situations where like a running back will pop or a receiver will pop, but the quarterback's not right or the line's not right. Is it a vision thing from James Franklin saying this is what we want our team to be and recruit like? Is it a scheme thing? Is it a running into weird buzzsaw things? Like, if you had to pin down one thing that's holding back the offense that is more pronounced than another aspect, to you, what is the thing that needs or needed the most fixing?
I mean, I think at the end of the day, if you were going to fix one thing about Penn State's offense overall, I think the thing that has missed is a really elite quarterback. I think that Sean Clifford was probably better than he gets credit for, and also just as bad as people said he was.
Yeah,
in terms
two things at the same time, yeah.
Yes, he was both of those things. I don't think Sean Clifford was ever going to win a national title game at Penn State, and I think that had a lot to do with why people got tired of him. It wasn't that he was losing lots of games. This wasn't sort of Anthony Morelli banging his head up against the wall sort of thing. This was just, you knew what you were going to get, and they were going to have to play this kid for 5 years. So it was just sort of was this awkward situation there. I think, you know, Tracy McSorley, great quarterback, had a ton of great weapons. And I think to a certain extent, you know, Trace had his limitations as well, but he made up for them in a lot of different ways. I think the struggle last year was that Drew, you know, I think he's raw. I think that we lean a lot on what the word prospect means. And in theory, that means we think that you can project out to be this guy one day. And I think a lot of people expected him to show up and be Trevor Lawrence. And I think realistically, and Drew has said this, that, you know, there are certain guys that have played quarterback their entire life, that they started out as a quarterback, they continued playing quarterback. Drew only picked up quarterbacking a few years ago, is still sort of learning everything about what that takes, and that doesn't absolve him of making mistakes. But I do think he's raw, and I think on the other side of that coin, Penn State probably had maybe its worst receiving room that it's had since the sanctions in terms of a clear-cut number one guy. They were bouncing from Chris Godwin to Jahan Dotson to Parker Washington to guys that were really
KJ Hamler. Yep.
KJ Hamler. And they just, Keandre Lambert-Smith was supposed to be that guy, but I think someone who's made his entire career of being up and down is not a good guy to lean on for your number one overall receiver, and that's sort of how that panned out. So, yeah, I mean, I think schematically the question will be what it looks like under Andy Kotelnicki this year, because I think he's sort of made his bones making something out of nothing. And I think if Penn State's offense comes out this year and looks a lot like it has the last several years, that'll point the finger at James more concretely, because I think that there has been the argument that James dabbles in the offense, but pretty much every offensive coordinator before and after the fact has said that's not really what goes on. And I don't think that the offense has struggled because in a random third down in the second half, James has decided to take over the offense and suddenly things go off the rails. So to me, if they come out with this new offensive coordinator that's, sort of has the Joe Moorhead crazy eye to him, and they still kind of the same, then I think you point that finger somewhere else. But yeah, to me, I think they just need that elite level quarterback play, because unless you're Alabama or unless you're a program that's just stacked absolutely everywhere, quarterback can transcend a lot of issues. Then again, if you don't have good receivers, somebody still has to catch the ball.
So one thing that a number of those schools that you mentioned that have had great quarterback play and have led those teams to higher levels of success than Penn State has seen is they're not recruiting quarterbacks from Ohio and Pennsylvania, whereas Penn State does. Penn State, year over year over year, whether it's Sean Clifford, whether it's Drew Allar, I know Trace McSorley's from Virginia, and when Ohio State brings in a PA quarterback, it doesn't fully work out, as Kyle McCord is now playing for Syracuse. What is the scope like for geographic recruiting at quarterback for James Franklin? I know, Justin Fields was in the fold for a stretch there, which probably gives us a different Penn State team. But is Penn State making attempts to go west, to go to Atlanta continually? Like, what is the seriousness with which Penn State does, cast a wide net to find that superstar quarterback when a lot of Ohio, a lot of PA guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is, that's one of the bigger picture struggles that Penn State has, in a sense that the footprint's good. I don't think anyone's going to say that the DMV doesn't have talent.
Right.
Or that, Ohio and Pennsylvania don't historically produce talent. But, just go to Atlanta and get the best quarterback. It's like, well, welcome to every other college football program in America that's trying to, do those same sorts of things. Now, obviously, Penn State, has more of a cachet than some other programs might they're on that same hunt. But yeah, that's a challenge. And I think, the challenge kind of comes back to a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy at quarterback, where I think that some people go, Penn State's not a bad quarterback school, but not the obvious one of the top 10 programs in America that you would go, yes, they will make you into a top 5 draft pick if you are a quarterback there. And I think that is hard, because you have to take a guy that's maybe not as good and make him better than he should be, and then that proves it. Or you find out that he can't be that good and he isn't that good, and then everyone says you can't develop quarterbacks. So, I think that's really where the pressure is with this whole Drew situation, is you finally get a guy who has, the recruiting stars and the sort of hype around him, and you go, okay, this is your opportunity to take a guy who should be good and make him good, and he should be better than the other guys that you have, which is part of what has made the whole fact that Penn State's receivers have been probably the worst they've been in a while kind of funny in a hindsight, because it's like they finally get a really good quarterback in theory, and then he doesn't have anyone to throw it to, when that really had not been Penn State's issues. So to answer your actual question, yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely a challenge that the footprint doesn't always hold that kind of level of a quarterback. And I think there's obviously the inherent challenge of, if you could just go recruit the South, everyone would do it, and everyone already is. Sure. So there's that aspect as well.
On the topic of the receiver room, which I know is a very popular subject, 5 guys transferred out, including Lambert-Smith, who you mentioned earlier. I have heard a million assumptions, conspiracy theories, what have you, as to why, ranging from they don't like the new offense, confidence in Drew Allar, a million of them, a garden variety if you go out on social media. What is the reason for the exodus in the receiver room?
I mean, I think if you look at the actual guys that left, Keandre is probably the only one that was ever going to be statistically relevant. Malik Mega is a great kid. He was a captain, a special teams guy. I think everybody knows that special teams players are important, but I don't think that anyone has ever used that label necessarily in a flowing positive way when it comes to talk about the up and coming receivers. So to Keandre, I don't like to talk badly about guys because I don't think that that's fair, because I think that we see them in high pressure situations after emotional things. We're not their friends. We're not trying to be. What they're like away from the microphone is not necessarily what they're like with their friends and with their teammates. But Keandre has always been kind of moody. He's been when he's high, he's high. When he's low, he's low. And honestly, I think that is at least part of the reason why he's had production issues and consistency issues. So I don't want to say that Penn State is better off without Keandre Lambert-Smith. I don't think that's fair to him, and I don't think it's fair for me to say. But the idea that Keandre, who basically didn't have a catch after the Michigan game, I think he had like one in the that's not true, but he effectively was out of the offensive sort of formula for the back half of the year. That a guy who is sometimes a little mercurial wants to start fresh somewhere else, especially in this day and age of NIL, where you can go, not only can I start over, I can get paid to do it. I don't think that that's unreasonable. So, yeah, I mean, I think it might have been different if Mike Yurcich hadn't been fired. I think he always struck me as a sort of strange and grumpy guy. The idea that maybe not being in a very successful offense with a guy that's maybe occasionally hard to like might make you want to move on. But I think individually, the numbers add up to that many departures, but I think you can kind of explain away each of them in a way that's just sort of like, it makes sense for them. It makes sense for Penn State, and it's probably not indicative of anything much larger than that.
You're setting me up perfectly, Ben, because my next question was going to be for you to compare and contrast Mike Yurcich and new offensive coordinator, who we mentioned earlier, Andy Kotelnicki, who comes up from Kansas. What are the pros and cons of each in your observations?
Yeah, I mean, Mike was one of those guys that I would remember seeing him at like recruiting camps or something like that, driving around with 2 Red Bulls on a golf cart. just sort of like pure, just like, I have not slept in 4 days kind of energy. Obviously, he was a big part of Drew Allar committing to Penn State. They had a good relationship. There's something to be said for that for sure. So I'm not saying that Mike Yurcich is unlikable or anything like that, but I think he just had a sort of like, sort of gruff personality at times that maybe didn't translate well for certain people. And obviously, people are willing to put up with a lot more when you're scoring a lot of points against good teams. Andy Kotelnicki, he reminds me a lot of Joe Moorhead in terms of this kind of like real unhealthy enthusiasm for football in a way that like translates to, I am having a lot of fun. I feel like there's 2 versions of unhealthy love for football. One is you're sort of like Jim Harbaugh and it creeps everybody out a little bit.
Sure.
And the other is sort of like, this is a lot of fun and I'm not taking myself too seriously, but I also happen to be really good at what I do kind of thing. And I think that he strikes that good balance of those 2 things. I remember Joe Moorhead, the guys would talk about him being like, we're going to call this play and I know this guy's going to be open. Don't worry about it. It's going to work kind of thing. And I think Andy Kotelnicki has this similar sort of like, don't be too stressed. This is going to be okay. I know what we're doing kind of thing. Now, everybody's super happy in May when you haven't lost a game and everybody's easy to talk to when nothing bad has happened. But I think that Andy Kotelnicki is a lot more relaxed. And I think in an era where Penn State could, you talk about basketball and sometimes shooters will talk about they're holding the ball too tightly and it's impacting their ability to make the shots. I think if Penn State's offense is sort of just holding the playbook too tightly, it's impacting their ability to find success. I have no idea if that analogy really works, but I do think that Andy Kotelnicki's sort of relaxed nature works in Penn State's favor in a moment where certainly there's a lot of moving pieces.
I want to go to the other side of the ball because we've asked you a bunch of questions so far about why isn't success happening to the degree that Penn State fans would expect on offense. What is the cocktail for this consistent success on defense? And I'm sure there's a number of different elements, but different coordinators, guys transferring in and out, but guys becoming or developing into high-level NFL draft picks. It almost doesn't matter the year, doesn't matter the coordinator, doesn't matter the players, that the Penn State defense is going to be one of the more consistent elements of college football as a whole. If you had to sort of mix that cocktail, what elements go into that consistent success?
I mean, I think the biggest thing is that there's reputation there. I think that Penn State's been able to maintain good defensive product really for the last 10, basically for forever, but certainly in the modern era, they've been able to put together good defenses. And I think that kind of goes back to what I was saying about quarterbacks, that when you have the reputation of being able to develop or not develop quarterbacks, it impacts your ability to bring people into the fold that are interested in doing that. And I think, the fact that Penn State's gone smaller over the years, gotten more athletic, gotten faster, I think appeals to sort of the modern defensive player, because it works better in modern offensive football to slow them down with guys that have that sort of equal athleticism and size and ability. I've always said that until Penn State's defense is bad, I'm going to assume that it's good, and that's basically been the case. And I think a lot of that has to do with reputation. A lot of that has to do with, in some regards, defense is a little bit easier than offense in terms of developing and getting on the same page and being able to have that continuity year in and year out. And I think all of those things have kind of led to a program that it can't lean on offense all the time, but it can almost always lean on its defense. And to a certain extent, Penn State's defense over the last 5 years or so is responsible for as many wins on that schedule as the offense. So I think that sort of thing breeds a snowball that is easy to keep rolling because guys know what to expect and sort of what the standard is, and they're interested in upholding that.
Fair enough. And I know every fan base does this if they're rooting for at least a decent team, that they circle a year. They say, this is when we're going to have so many upperclassmen. This is when these guys come back and we have coaching continuity. In retrospect, and looking at 2023 and looking at the two deep for last year's defense, Chop Robinson, obviously Abdul Carter still there, Kalen King, a number of guys who were, all Big Ten, if not even bigger type talents. Is 2023 now looked at as a wasted year because of the ceiling of the defense, or am I just being dramatic?
I think there's no question that one of the things that you have to have if you want to win a national title or at least make the playoffs is an elite defense. And Penn State has had for the last 3 or 4 years a really, really good defense and has not always had the offense to match that. So I think there's no question that for the number of good things that Penn State's defense did last year, that it is, in terms of quality, a shame that the offense couldn't match it relative to what that Penn State team could have done if it had a slightly better offense. Because I maintain that if Penn State had last year's receiver room, if it had Parker Washington and Mitchell Tinsley, that it probably beats Ohio State or Michigan, if not both. I'm not going to go out and say that absolutely would have happened, but that was all it was really missing, was just a little bit more offensive potency, and those guys both had that. So I think it's a missed opportunity in a certain sense, and I think there's no question that you look at some of the guys that Penn State lost. I mean, Kalen King, if you had told me 2 years ago that he was going to go near the end of the draft, I would have never believed you. That was sort of an odd fall for him, but he was still a very good corner. It's not like he had a bad year. It just wasn't quite what people expected. So other than that, yeah, I think there's no question that anytime a team can lay claim to having one of the best defenses in America and can't follow that up with offense, there's no question that that's a missed opportunity.
So when you look at this year's defense, the first name that's always going to pop is Abdul Carter when anybody has a conversation about the 2024 defense, and he moves obviously from the linebacking core to more of an edge player who should be a terror. But where is this defense strong? What are the names people should know? And do you expect similarly lofty performances against, honestly, a pretty great schedule, all things considered? I think they miss Oregon, they miss Iowa, and the defense wouldn't have had problems with Iowa's offense this year, but I know this is a team that should have high expectations considering where the schedule is.
Yeah, the schedule, just a quick note on that, is sort of interesting this year because I think Penn State plays 6 teams between the non-conference and the new Big Ten teams that it basically doesn't have any regular familiarity with. It is a very weird schedule in that regard. I mean, that's true for, I suppose, basically everyone in the Big Ten this year. But that aside, yeah, I mean, obviously it starts and ends to a certain extent with Abdul Carter. I think it says a lot about his athleticism and abilities that they were willing to make that move. And I think it says a lot about, obviously, the linebackers that they have that they can feel confident about, taking a guy that's a potential All-American candidate from one position and moving him to another one and saying, I'm sure these guys have got it figured out. I think Keon Wiley is an exciting guy to talk about. I think Kobe King, Kalen King's brother, has been there. And Tony Rojas has been sort of, even last year, Tony Rojas was, as a true freshman, a guy that got a lot of hype in spring practice about being a linebacker that can make an impact. And I think really, and he's sort of admitted this after the fact, one of the better things that Manny Diaz did was go, just wait, just develop, get comfortable. You're going to have your time. We're okay at linebacker. We don't need to throw you out there right now. Just wait. And then Tony Rojas would go in garbage time, take 2 snaps and have 7 tackles at the end of them somehow. He was just this machine that would just eat people up when he had an opportunity. So I think there's high expectations for him to make a really big impact on Penn State this year. He has a lot of athleticism. He's exciting to watch. So that's going to be fun. I think, obviously, Zakee Wheatley is another guy at safety that I think it was 2 years ago. He was the takeaway king in spring and summer practice. 2 years ago, he had a lot more production in terms of forced fumbles and interceptions. Kind of fell out of the equation last year a little bit at safety for various reasons, but seems to be, I think James said he's had his best sort of off season of his career so far. And then, obviously you look at, I guess we're talking defense. I think that, he's a big guy to take a step forward, a lot like Tony Rojas is as well. And then defensive tackle, Hakeem Beeman's been around for forever. Zane Durant's been around for a while. So it's really one of those things where they just kind of reload. I think that's one thing that they've done well over the years on the depth chart is Penn State has been a legitimate 2 deep at just about every position. That's not to say that there's another Abdul Carter behind Abdul Carter. But I do think that they've had the ability to develop, and I think much to the chagrin of some fans at times, that's part of the benefit of why you'll see Penn State will basically do an entire line change on the defensive front for a drive. They'll just play different guys and go, okay, it's your turn to get better. And it's worked out well for them because, it just has. But I think because of that, they've been able to throw guys into bigger roles. They're already kind of familiar with what's going on, and it's benefited their ability to really reload year after year.
Here's my devil's advocate, because I do actually believe Penn State's defense has been excellent these past few years. They've played a roster of quarterbacks and offenses in the Big Ten, which by and large do not wow people. Whether they play Penn State, whether they don't play Penn State. Your Indianas, your Minnesotas, your recent Michigan States. Penn State has not seen a number of great quarterbacks and high-flying offenses. In the new look Big Ten, we're getting 4 schools that have produced eye-popping offenses, big stats, big numbers, NFL picks in Oregon, Washington, USC, and UCLA. Do you believe any adjustment is needed to account for more offensive firepower with a new look conference, or it's just more of the same? They have NFL picks themselves. They shut down bad offenses like a good defense should shut down a bad offense, or is more savviness from James Franklin needed with a little more firepower on the schedule in the years to come?
I think it's a little bit of both, but I think too, to a certain extent, you can ask the other side of that question, which is, are these high-powered offenses taking advantage of bad defenses? I think a little bit of the first half of the national title game, where everyone was sort of used to the idea of Washington scoring and having these big explosive plays, and Michigan was like, we'll just repeatedly punch you in the mouth and you will take it because that's what we do. And obviously that game, they figured things out and et cetera, et cetera. But I think there's no question, at the end of the day, there's going to be an adjustment period for everyone. I think that for whatever USC has to improve defensively, I don't think that anyone looks at USC and goes, oh, well, they'll be fun to stop. This will be easy. This is like playing West Coast Rutgers. Like, this is not exactly what's going on here. So I think you're going to have to adjust. I think if you're a Big Ten East, rest in peace program, you've had to deal with that a little bit because Michigan and Ohio State have been playing different brands of good football. I think historically Ohio State has been the smaller, more athletic, more explosive, more Oregon, USC-ish offense, and Michigan has been very Michigan. And at different times, those have worked out in different ways. But I think if you're Penn State, you go, well, thanks a lot, guys, because now we have to get ready for two different brands of offensive football.
Right.
But at the end of the day, 3 out of those 4 teams for sure are going to pose problems to Penn State in ways that theoretically Penn State has not seen a lot of before. And certainly you can look at, the bowl game. Penn State goes and plays Ole Miss, and Ole Miss, for a lot of different reasons, some of them Penn State's fault and a lot of them just Ole Miss being good, they were able to throw the ball on a team that had not seen a quarterback or receivers, frankly, that were able to do what Ole Miss could do.
Who is like the heartbeat of this team, Ben? Who's like the leader? We know the big names. We know Drew Allar and Nick Singleton, and we can go down the list there. Abdul Carter. But like, who is the guy in the big team huddle that's going to get everybody fired up for this season?
It's a good question because they had a lot of turnover in that area. And I think that Drew he's not vocal. And that has changed even in the last year or the last 2 years since he's gotten on campus. So I don't want to say that he is not more vocal. But yeah, I mean, I think that they've got to find that. I think they've got to find the heartbeat. And there are a lot of good leaders. Dom DeLuca has been around for forever at linebacker. Nick Singleton commands a lot of respect. They've had guys on the offensive line historically that have been that way. Defensively, Abdul, I think is a guy that they can lean on in that area. But even he is kind of quiet. Now, again,
right.
What you're like in front of a camera is not the same thing as what you're like in halftime in a locker room kind of thing. But I think that, that is always not the missing piece for Penn State because they've had great leaders. But I think that's the missing piece that you have to find for every great team is who are the guys that are going to stand up and rally the troops. And I think, we go back to Trace. That was one of the things that made Trace so good is like people were willing to die for him in that locker room, basically. And that Penn State team rallied around the belief that they had in him to do the right thing and to make plays. And I think that, to a certain extent, that's the challenge that Penn State faces with its offense is getting the defense to really buy into what it's doing. Because I think there was at times this sort of exhaustion that Penn State's defense was so good and was doing so well, and Penn State's offense was scoring 13 points against Michigan or against Ohio State or struggling. And I think, they didn't give really good answers, but I asked some defensive players last year, what does a quarterback need to do to win you over? What does a quarterback need to do to win over a defense? And I think that that's sort of the challenge that Penn State needs to figure out this year, which is who's going to be your leader on both sides of the ball. Defensively, there's always guys that step up, but offensively, can you have guys that will transcend that side of the ball and kind of bring everybody together in a way where you go, we believe in what everyone's doing and we believe in our ability to have success with what everyone's doing. And if they can do that, I think that goes a long way because I am a big believer in the idea that good vibes win big games. I think if you have a locker room that gets along, a locker room that believes, I'm an Eagles fan. I don't know that when the Eagles won the Super Bowl that they were necessarily the absolute best team, but they had really good vibes. They believed in each other, and that goes a long way. And I think for Penn State, if they can get both sides of the ball to believe in each other and do it more animatedly, I think that goes a long way as well.
Final question, Ben Jones. I feel like I'm a broken record when I'm going to ask this question, but will it ever happen for James Franklin at Penn State? It's the whole setup for this series of episodes that we're doing. It's the question I feel like we ask maybe more about James Franklin than 95% of the other coaches around college football. Is this ever going to happen? Is he ever going to get over that proverbial hump at Penn State?
How do you define it is important here. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you ask the question, do I think that Penn State is one of the programs equipped to find success at an elite level occasionally? I don't think that you have to convince me that Penn State recruits well enough or has the facilities. You know, the idea that Penn State can be really good and win a national title, the 2016, 2017 teams were, give or take, probably about as good as anybody. And if you put them in the playoffs in 2016 over Ohio State, I mean, Alabama and Clemson in that era were kind of a different animal, but they were as good as anyone, give or take. So the idea that Penn State football can be good enough under James Franklin to win a national title is a thing that you don't have to twist my arm too much to buy into the notion that that is a thing that can happen. I think I go back to what I've said about Penn State's defenses, which is until Penn State's defense is bad, I'm going to assume that it's good. Until Penn State starts beating Michigan and Ohio State, I'm going to assume that they're going to lose. So, you know, the new playoff format changes things. The Big Ten being different changes the arithmetic there. Lots of things are new. I don't know that we can really even assess how people are doing anymore until we're 5 years down the road and go, so how is this working out and how are people looking? Do I think James Franklin can get it done? I think he's better than he gets credit for, but I think that 10 years is a lot of time to gather data. So do I think that a good program can get lucky enough over the course of a season to win a national title? Sure. Would I put my life savings down on James Franklin winning a national title at Penn State? Probably not, but
come on.
Yeah. So I don't think it happens under James, but that doesn't mean that I think that it can't. I think there are a lot of things working in Penn State's favor and a lot of reasons to believe in what Penn State's trying to do. And I think the big X factor in all of this is that Pat Kraft has sort of taken the get rich or die trying approach to facility spending at this point. And I think if you look at Georgia, one of the things that Georgia did with Kirby Smart was say, let's just give you all the money that we have and see what you can do with it if we just buy everything and make it really nice. And he goes, okay, that sounds good. And I don't think that Pat Kraft is quite there yet. But the fact that they are spending money as much as they are, the fact that they're investing in facilities as much as they are, I think that was one of James's biggest qualms under Sandy Barber. And I think if that variable changes, you're looking at a different kind of Penn State football program that maybe is a little bit different down the road. But again, it's a crapshoot. I know I'm hedging my bets. I don't think it'll happen under James, but I think that there's reason to believe that I'm wrong.
Fair enough. Ben Jones, statecollege.com. It's been too long since we had you on the show, so it's good to have you back on. We'll definitely have to do this again sometime soon. We appreciate your insight. Take care, Ben. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, fellas.
All right. There you go. Ben Jones, statecollege.com. All things Penn State. The answer to the question of will it ever happen for James Franklin is interesting.
Yeah. I think it's fascinating. And I want you to tell me what your answer is, what's holding it back or what's giving you confidence.
I feel like I have to answer the question the same way Ben did. And
okay. Boo.
Well, I don't like
I'm just kidding.
If you put somebody on the spot and you say, what is holding Penn State back? We could throw 1,000 things out there. It's obvious last season, offensively, there were some issues that they need to resolve. Now, whether or not new coordinator can do that remains to be seen. But it's not just that. It's not just the offense, right? They've got this defense, but there is something about the program that I have not been able to put my finger on. And I don't know what it is, but there is something holding them back. Now, maybe the playoff, maybe easier qualification, quote unquote, easier qualification into the playoff, i.e. more teams, will help them get over that proverbial hump. If they get a home playoff game in Beaver Stadium in mid-December against, whoever, that obviously poses a pretty nice advantage for the Nittany Lions. That would be winning a playoff game, I think, would constitute getting over something of a hump, playing in a meaningful game and winning it. I think that's what it takes to make it feel like there is some real momentum behind this program getting to new heights. But as for what is stopping them from getting there, Ben said elite quarterback play, for sure. That is an element to it. you and I talked a little bit before we hit record about recruiting. Recruiting's been very, very good.
Yeah.
It hasn't necessarily been elite like a Georgia, but then again, which programs have been elite like Georgia? There's only a handful that have. So whatever it is, it doesn't feel like it's much. It just feels like it's been consistent and persistent and annoying, frankly, for those of us who graduated from the school. Hopefully this is the year where they can get past that. Again, whatever that is, hopefully this is the year with the schedule, with the new setup, with the new conference, what have you, where we can see Penn State get into some of these higher leverage games of the postseason and actually play for something. But as for what it is, we could be talking about this 50 years from now and still not be able to put our finger on just that one thing that felt like it was holding them back.
Okay, so my answer is no. And I'm going to say it with my chest. I'm routinely wrong, and so I guess that's my hedge. But I'm going to say no because of the time we've had with James Franklin.
It's been a decade. It's been a decade.
The sample size isn't nothing. That we know exactly how it doesn't happen for Penn State. We know that they don't have an offense and defense typically firing on all cylinders at the same time. We know the quarterback issue. We know that they haven't had true star power at quarterback. As much as I personally loved watching, I think it was the 2016 Penn State team with sophomore Trace McSorley bombing it downfield, and as much as I personally loved watching Saquon Barkley, they've had star power on offense. Line has been an issue. I think you can look at the last decade or so of Penn State football and sort of said, like, well, they've won in spite not having a dominant offensive line really in any one of those years. Maybe I'm wrong about, they had a specific year, but I've been doing this show long enough with you to know that you've never truly been in love with a Penn State offensive line in the modern era. So the reason I say it is we've had the sample size and they managed to lose in like an impressive variety of ways, right? That we talked 2-3 years ago when it was Michigan, Eric All at the end of the game, that like Penn State didn't have a go-to plan at the end of a close game against a strong team. Or Penn State loses the Ohio State game 2 years ago with Sean Clifford throwing 3 interceptions and then looking actually like really good. Like Parker Washington was shredding the Ohio State secondary, but just had an absolute garbage first quarter that they couldn't recover from. And so the variety of ways that they lose big games against big teams tells me that you don't break through. And that's my idea of why Penn State has sort of reached its plateau and will continue on this line of being very good, but doesn't have the extra gear to hit the bar that Penn State fans historically expect of this program.
Yeah, I mean, I think eventually there will be some sort of breakthrough moment. Eventually there has to be, because...
And look, there was for Harbaugh, who was there forever.
And I think that's sort of my thought on the matter.
Okay.
I am obviously not rooting against Penn State or James Franklin. That's not what I do. It is frustrating that it has been the same story year in and year out. I read the posts.
Yeah.
I read the tweets. I see what people say. Everyone feels similarly in the Penn State football world. It just feels like there is this glass ceiling of sorts that is holding the team down. And they're close. As Ben said, there's a lot of talent. He wouldn't want to bet against Penn State winning a national championship, winning a couple playoff games, playing for something really important in the grand scheme of any particular college football season. You wouldn't want to bet against that, but you also wouldn't want to bet for it. Just, we've got that history. I can't on this show, on my show, say it'll never happen. I can't do it. I can't bring myself to do it.
With James Franklin specifically.
I can't bring myself to say no, because the guy's grown on me over the years. Initially, I thought he was a snake oil salesman. I have come around.
What doesn't mean I think he's a bad coach.
No,
it just means...
I've come around. I've done a 180 on James Franklin. I love the guy. And
wow.
I have. I have. And,
yeah, ask Ty that in mid-October.
Ask me that in mid-October.
It's easy to say it in mid-May.
It might be a little bit of a different situation. But he's grown on me in a way that I can't deny. I want to root for him. I want it to happen for him.
Okay.
I desperately want Drew Allar to live up to all of that hype. It just, you talk yourself into a corner waiting around for things to happen like this. Mm-hmm. There are other programs out there that are just sort of doing it year in and year out, and you know what to expect. Penn State, at this point, 10 years in with James Franklin, to expect that it's suddenly going to change because of one player or one coordinator, I don't know. That might be a bit far-fetched to me.
Here's the other element of all of this, and that didn't really exist in the major first chunk of James Franklin's tenure, is we're in the portal era. And I, from afar, and maybe you have a different thought about this, like Penn State hasn't been killed by the portal, and they haven't added like crazy game changers. This year we'll see I think it's AJ Harris, who's I think going to start at one of the corner spots, the transfer from Georgia. They lose, it was a great name, King Mack, Mack to Alabama, the safety. They lose, as Ben mentioned, Keandre Lambert-Smith, but they haven't added crazy game changers, but they haven't, maybe, and please remind me, like catastrophic losses at the same time.
No. I don't think so. I mean, I think they have been very comfortably in the middle.
Tasteful portal moves.
Julian Fleming.
Yeah, that could add huge pop, potentially.
Julian Fleming, a PA kid, comes back home to PA now. He figures to be kind of like the top target, right? Like, not kind of. He will be the top target for Drew Allar this season. I think they have been very targeted in the guys that they've gone after. And to your point, yeah, they've been fairly lucky with respect to not losing their shirt in the portal. Yeah. It's a big enough program that plays for high enough stakes year in and year out. That's put, certainly on the defensive side of the ball, enough guys in the league to have that reputation, as Ben alluded to earlier. So they've been okay with respect to the portal. And I think,
do you want more as a Penn State fan? Do you want them to be more aggressive in certain areas? Do you want them to do you lament any of the losses?
I don't so much lament the losses. When you see 5 receivers leaving the receiver room now, I understand these might not be guys outside of KLS who factor in as being big-time weapons.
Malik McClain was one of them to ASU, I think. Yeah.
But when you see that number of any one position group walking out the door, of course, the red flags go up. You wonder do they know something that we don't, that we should be paying attention to? But as Ben mentioned, again, outside of KLS, I don't know if anybody factored in as being truly statistically significant with respect to this offense. Right. So would I like to see more playmakers out wide? I would. Absolutely.
Which is a position group where you can find guys. Like, you can find guys. If your team needs receiver improvement and you are the size of Penn State, or you are Penn State, unless quarterback is a disaster, which I don't think Drew Allar is a disaster. I think maybe it's just a development issue. That's a position group where you can find guys on a couple different levels.
Yeah. He's, as Ben mentioned, he's raw. He's still learning. I'm curious to see if he takes a step forward now with a new coordinator at the helm.
Are you a believer? A Drew Allar believer?
I'll be a Drew Allar believer the same way I was a Christian Hackenberg believer. Right up until the day he retired from.
Oh man, I tried so hard.
A lackluster NFL career. Yeah. I mean,
it wasn't just a lackluster NFL career.
It was non-existent.
It was a lackluster sophomore and junior campaign as well.
I will retire from this podcast at some point still believing in Christian Hackenberg.
In Hack? Yeah.
The way I will Drew Allar.
He's PA too, right?
Christian Hackenberg?
Hackenberg was local. He was in
Hackenberg was from Virginia.
Oh, he's from Virginia. Who am I thinking that was from PA? So, God, there was... Oh, I just think, you know what it is? It's just Hackenberg to me. It was just like, oh, he stuck around through the transition. It felt like local to me, but obviously it wasn't. Man, I hope it works out. I really do, because the best of Drew Allar is crazy impressive. I know his spring game, like everybody's, up and down. Hit some receivers, missed some receivers, dirted a couple balls, but hopefully the new vision behind the scenes in Kotelnicki is a difference maker for this offense, and confidence for Drew Allar, who just threw a lot short last year. Did not succeed downfield at all, really.
Mechanically, I think he's gotten better. I think he's very sound. The ball jumps out of his hand. He obviously can make all of the throws. If it is truly a processing thing that will come with more seasoning, hopefully that will come with a guy in Kotelnicki who worked wonders at Kansas, right? He worked wonders at Kansas, both in terms of what they did through the air and as well on the ground. Kansas was very quietly one of the better rushing teams in college football. That is what they were good at, and that should be what Penn State is also good at this season, given what they've got coming back in the backfield. Katron Allen with Nick Singleton. I would hope that they kind of tailor the offense around those two threats and then don't put it all on Drew Allar. And to that extent, the receiver room as well, because we don't know fully what's there yet. I think if they go with that template to start the year, that would be a good approach to it. I am not an offensive coordinator. I'm curious to see what it looks like, just the way everybody else is. So big thanks to Ben Jones from statecollege.com for stopping on by. Again, if you are out there and have any questions for Austin Price, who's going to join us from VolQuest to talk Tennessee a little bit later this week, hit us up, solidverbal@gmail.com, or really anywhere across social media. Send us a note. We'd love to get your input as for what questions you would like when we pose the question to Austin of, will it ever happen for Josh Heupel in Knoxville for Tennessee?
Yeah. Can't wait.
That's all I got, Dan.
I just a shout out to Abdul Carter for being sensational. That's all I have now.
All right. Well, that's all I got for now. We appreciate everybody downloading, listening, supporting what we do. Make sure you hit follow or subscribe on your podcasting or video app of choice. We appreciate it. It helps us out. Check verballers.com if you want ad-free episodes that we drop a little bit early, in addition to a bunch of extra bonus perks out on our Patreon. verballers.com. For that guy over there, my good friend Dan Rubenstein, for myself, Ty Hildenbrandt, thanks again for your ongoing support. We will talk to you all on Thursday. Stay solid.
Peace.